managing risk and controlling risk in the space program is identical to managing and controlling risk in the oil and gas industry.
We need to give up the idea that we can create and make risk assessments for all possible events. We cannot.
Everybody knows how to clean a sand filter now, right? This is madness. This is absolute bizarre. We need to understand how work actually is done.
If you really want to win the hearts and minds of people, you must join them and be sincere.
For the 12th year in a row, Oil Gas Denmark is hosting the annual Task Force Zero Offshore Safety Conference in Esbjerg. Over the last couple of years, the industry has gone through challenging times with low oil prices, cost reductions, and the significant changes that come in such times. And with change comes risk. How to ensure resilience in changing times and what it demands from us as leaders to make certain that we still improve on safety was on the agenda this year in Esbjerg.
I recall a Haage meeting not so long ago where we sat together and we talked about what is going on in each of the companies, and we realized at that meeting that actually all members were in a situation where we were either just being sold or about to be sold or being taken over by other companies, which of course resulted in a lot of uncertainty, changes in the way of working, etc., etc. So we realized that we needed to address that theme in the conference this year.
And during the day, this subject was touched, amongst others, not surprisingly, by the Danish country managers.
How do you keep the game straight on safety during times like that?
It's tough because you're quickly caught in many agendas when change comes. I mean, you have to discover your company. Everybody has a point of view about what you should be doing tomorrow. So again, we are not really thinking often about the next week or the next month, but we are really in the day-to-day.
Yeah. It's certainly a challenge. You have an additional time pressure where you then need to manage a process, and at the same time it's even more important to be visible and explain that and understand how it impacts and how you can help deal with those impacts and feelings that are going on in those events. So I think that's a challenge.
People's focus is very much on, well, what is now required from me? How will I be measured? How will I be looked at? And that in itself actually poses I wouldn't call it crisis, but it causes a disturbance where you do see that now, okay, everything has to be relevant because I'm not really sure what I'm being measured on. I think that's where we as leaders really need to be quite quickly out and saying, okay, this is strategy, this is the focus. That's the best way you can galvanize your people in that situation. Otherwise, if everything matters, nothing matters, and then you will have incident accidents.
The one thing I think we also need to remember, it is also an opportunity. That's what I've learned so far, that when you go through change and you need to manage a change, you need to understand your starting point for the change. And we've talked about drifting, and you sometimes find that drifting has taken place. So when you manage your change, you can sometimes find your way from your standard or your ideal state. And it's actually an opportunity to uncover some errors and bring those right in your systems.
Increasing focus on safety under challenging conditions was also the subject in a very open and honest presentation by Rudolph Driessen from Salem Petroleum, a collaboration between Gazprom Neft and Shell, where he revealed what for him had been the driver behind several years of intense work on improving safety. And the words that stood out was personal commitment.
Took me 3 years, it took 3 years, and as I will share some of my personal reflections in that particular journey.
If you're a leader, what does it take from you to take on a journey like this?
You need to allow time. In my particular case, somebody asked me, and I made a stab at it, 50%. Even when I look back, I actually think it must have been 60 or even more percent of my time, whilst I'm doing a normal job, to roll this out. And you need to make it very personal, not only to your managers, not up the way. You need to make it personal down the way into the workforce. You need to be with them, you need to feel them, you need to listen. And then once you listen, you need to also act in a way they hope or believe it shows genuinity in your change journey. The biggest challenge was overcoming skepticism, almost call it professionalism. I mean, we had managers and leaders who were in their own rights very professional. They believed they were really safety conscious. Yeah, and they started to behave in a scenario whereby, well, we don't need consultants, we don't need all the soft relationship kind of stuff anymore. We could really do it ourselves and move on, kind of thing. So their impatience took the better out of it. So, and it's bringing them back a little bit to ground zero every time we had either an incident or something like that, to say, well, hold on, if you really look at the causal reasons, you know, we as the leaders are part of the cause, not the worker. And that took much more effort than what I bargained for. That is absolutely a true statement. Yeah, to really change the more higher level managers, to really think through that it was their behavior which influenced the bottom line outcome, either safety or something else.
I think it's really important that you ensure that at all times you've got the right level of authority to drive a program like this. This cannot be simply something which could delegate downwards.
You need somebody who is an authority enough, who can then really go ahead and drive with passion. And the real challenge is to turn these early followers into early leaders. Now, that takes the real kind of effort, because you need to immerse yourself deeply.
Knowing where you want to go and keeping focus was also central elements in the video interview with Professor Jordan B. Peterson, made for the conference by moderator Alan Palmer. An interview that revolved around what it takes to be a leader.
What makes a leader? And here's what he had to say about that.
You need a broad-scale vision. You have to know what it is that you're doing with your life, let's say, generally speaking, but more particularly in the next 3 to 5 years. What do you want? What do you want from your friends, your family, your intimate relationships, your employment, your education, your care of your mental and physical health, your response to temptations like drug and alcohol use? Like, if you could have what you wanted, if you could lay your life out properly, how would you be functioning across those 7 dimensions? Why would that work for you? Why would it work for your family? And why would it work for the broader community? Then that gives you a reason. And if you have a reason that's well thought through, that you find compelling, so that's a compelling story, let's say, the kind of compelling story a leader might tell, then that will provide you with motivation to do the things that are difficult that you need to do. So that's positive emotion, that motivation. It's a neurochemical system that runs on the chemical dopamine. And it's the neurochemical system that underlies people's willingness to undertake something voluntarily.
The theme of trusting the frontline workers to empower them instead of overloading them with procedures and rules became the most recurring subject of the day. First touched by Jim Weatherby in his presentation from his time as Navy pilot, 6 times in space, and later working in the oil and gas industry.
This supervisor who I met one night, he was running the welding crew, a very good team, always welded to perfection and often did better and better as time went on. So I asked the supervisor, how do you inspire your people as they go to work every day? And he looked at me and he smiled. He said, you know, if they welded 95 feet yesterday, which is the metric for a welder is how many linear feet you weld, I don't ask them, please weld 100 feet today. I ask them, please weld correctly. Let's become the best welders in the fleet. Let's figure out how to do a really good job of this, be high quality welders. And the upside for the organization is often they do exceed 95 feet because they have fewer failed inspections. They're doing a great job. They don't have to repeat work, so they are able to get more efficient and more effective and better at the job. But the point is the supervisor is insulating his crew from the numerical metrics that are levied from above by the managers. Those metrics are important. You do have to measure performance, But when you're talking about the frontline workforce, the supervisors should really isolate you or insulate you from those metrics and help you improve the quality of the activities.
Normally you don't like to use the word safety. Why is that?
When I learned to fly in the U.S. Navy, we didn't really separate safety from operations. We operated with high excellence, which meant we had to operate safely, or we would die and not complete the mission. More importantly, we couldn't attempt another mission tomorrow. So safety was part of what we did, and there was no real need to separate it from normal activities. So I like to use the words operating excellence. Eventually, when you achieve a high level of operating excellence, safety is not just part of what you do, safety is everything you do.
I would like you to elaborate a little bit more on the differences between rule-based procedures and principle-based techniques. I suppose you need both.
The rules only cover specific cases and certain things, and it is so often in the oil and gas industry and the aviation industry that here I am, I'm confronted with doing something and there is no rule. Now what do? I better be doing the right techniques, and so you have to do both. In the beginning of my career, I was very fortunate that I learned in the U.S. Navy flying on aircraft carriers in single-seat jets where I was the only one in the operation. I learned this concept of I must understand the rule, but I must also understand the techniques of operating excellence. It wasn't until much later when I was asked to take a position, an executive position in the NASA organization, when I began to realize the importance of the techniques for other people who weren't trained in the importance of the techniques of operating excellence. In fact, they had a different suite of techniques. They were doctors, scientists, engineers, and they weren't trained as pilots. And even though they now were astronauts, they weren't operating with a set of techniques that pilots all understood. So it became very clear to me as the director of flight crew operations that we had to help people who didn't learn as pilots how to suddenly supplement the rules and policy and procedures with a suite of techniques of operating excellence.
Starting off with some very personal eyewitness statements extracted from the Voices of Field in the TEPCO report Fukushima Nuclear Accident Analyzers, Senior Nuclear Safety Specialist Monica Haage in her presentation underlined the fact once again: we cannot prescribe and foresee everything in procedures and rules, not in complex systems like the nuclear or the oil and gas industry, as reality sometimes leaves procedures useless.
Let us frame our minds into that notion. How it was to be a TEPCO employee at Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, the 11th of March 2011.
At the time when the tsunami arrived, I saw the lamps on unit number 1 and 2 power panels flicker and then all went out at once. The diesel generator stopped and lamps started to go out one by one. I had no idea what was happening.
The operators started to follow the procedures, just as they were trained. Could you imagine to be the shift manager in the control room? Something happens that cannot happen. We need to give up the idea that we can create and make risk assessments for all possible events. We cannot.
In his usual thought-provoking style, Professor Sidney Dekker underlined the fact that we tend to take the ability of safe decision-making away from the front line by overloading the staff with procedures.
This is how to clean a sand filter. All right? So it's 4 a.m. in a night shift. This guy's drawing this out for me, and he says, oh, let me explain how to clean a sand filter. So you isolate on the one end, you isolate on the other end, and then you depressurize the filter housing, and then you get a little telltale on top to suggest whether you're actually safe to go, and then you clean the damn thing, and you do it in reverse. And I say, How long does that take? 30 minutes. How often do you do it? I ask. Past few days, 3 times in the last 3 days alone. Okay, so that's 30 minutes out on the deck, 0.4 degrees centigrade in May, by the way, with a 43 knot wind gusting to like 58 or something. And then he says, but we have a new procedure telling us how to do this. And I said, so that's not it. No. Remember, 4 steps, one way, 4 steps the other way, boom, you're done, 30 minutes. You can show the young lads how it works by taking them there. And then some brilliant mind has invented a procedure for this task. I should not show you the logo, because it is utterly generic to your industry. But here it is, all right? So logoless. There it was. 28 pages, 104 steps, 22 warnings, and 191 signatures, which you have to complete in the field. Did I just mention that it was 0.4 degrees, wind 43 knots, gusting 58? Where do you think these pages are going to go, right? So this is easy to make things difficult. This is absolute bizarre. We need to understand how work actually is done rather than how some people imagine it to be done.
Safety is a systemic nature, so we need to understand the complexity of a systemic approach to safety, which bring dynamic interrelationships, which is not linear, and most of the way we approach safety is more linear, and it's because human nature. That's the human nature, and we tend to want to engineer away or control safety in that way, and that doesn't work like that. And as you talked also about the procedurized and compliance, we need to also to bring in more of the human aspect, the interrelationship between people. And as I said, red matters. If we divide it into 3 areas, the blue is the structure, the management system, the policies, those things that we are measured on. But the red part is the part which is the interrelationship, culture, leadership, which is more emotional based and driven. And then you have the learning, which is more in the stomach, and the organizational learning that comes with the green color. And I think if we can divide it up to those 3 and know that all of them are important, we also see there is an unbalance, because most of the safety system that it is based on the blue. And we're weak when it comes to tools on the red and the green, and I think there is where we really can improve.
Do we fool ourselves into believing we are safe?
Oh yeah, every day. Yes, absolutely. And I think we've got systems of accountability throughout the industry that actually aid and abet that fooling that we're safe. For example, we think that we're safe if we have low numbers of injuries and incidents, but these statistics, the facts, show that the opposite is actually the case. We fool ourselves that incentivizing bosses, leaders with bonus schemes that reward them for not having or having a low TRIFR rate actually helps us be safe. The opposite is true. The facts, the research results show that the opposite is true. We fool ourselves that if we make publicly the commitment to a goal 0 that we're safer. We're not. The results of the research, the facts, show that the opposite is true.
Maybe there's a chance that companies and organizations with an open culture also have more reportings of injuries, and organizations with a bad reporting cultures might not report everything, but fatalities can be hard to get around, so that might be the reason. What are your point of views on this?
That's it. You've nailed it. You've nailed it. Because the only injuries and incidents we know about are the ones that get reported.
The intelligence of really how to do the work is by the frontline people. And if we bring in more of that knowledge and intelligence in our decision making and work more systemically in decision making, bringing in a representation, we would probably catch more black swans or early signs, weak signals, or whatever you do. But it's not the way that we hierarchically are organizing. We still believe that command and control and procedurize is the way. It's not, because reality is more complex, and we need to face that we cannot control, we cannot create the perfect system.
The complex systems are fundamentally not controllable. You can actually do the mathematics on this and it will show that you can only control a complicated or simple system, but not a complex system. And so that illusion of control gets us to do the wrong sorts of things. In order to be safe in a complex system, goes very much back, right, to what Monica is saying. We have to enhance the capacities that make things go right, rather than stop the things from going wrong by over-prescribing and over-specifying every single procedure. Because in a complex system, that's a fool's errand. It's not going to work. You cannot derive the equation set for a complex system and say, here's all the procedures for how to run it. It's never going to work. You're always going to be behind or next or besides. So enhance the capacities in your teams, in your people, that make it go right.
One of the strongest things with this conference this year is that we had a very, very strong lineup of speakers with some very compelling messages to us.
What I take with me from this conference, and it also goes from the previous 12 conferences, is that there's so much reflection as people, especially outside the industry, is talking about this. So I sit and reflect on things. Well, hang on, what they're saying there, I've seen that in another place, or that could explain why we need to move in that direction and we need to focus more on this or that.
A little closer to earth and home. This is where I used to live every day. I went to work driving on this road. Once every 3 months, I would see somebody in the ditch. By the way, this person went off right next to the yellow sign which says drive safely.
Making it personal could stand as a kind of headline for this conference, partly because many of the presentations were very personal, partly because what stood out was to succeed in improving safety, we need to make safety a personal matter. Personal to the frontline worker, who should be involved in decision making and must learn how to deal with matters not necessarily written down in procedures. Personal to the leaders, who must make a personal commitment in order to make it a success.
We had Rudolph talking about being passionate about HSE, being out there, being in the front lines, listening, getting the feedback, what's happening there, and not be afraid to be out and get the bad news, which will then turn out to be the good news, because that's where we're learning from.
Committing personally and almost being the one carrying it and convincing person after person and creating this critical mass of supporters and believers in the ideas seems to be, at least in history, and I can relate to that, the one that kind of win the mass and then enable this bottom-up success that then he describes.
What did resonate with me in his story was, as you mentioned, the personal motivation throughout. And how he referenced how it took 24 hours to get to the field, and he did that several times a month, and he went out and talked to the people and understood the attitudes and the dynamics between the contractors and the staff folks and all the various groups that were at the work sites, and took that back. And both learned from it in terms of crafting the programs, and also the way you explain it, he got some followers. He was able to create the vision for them of where to go.
My impression is very clearly this is about leadership, individual leadership at all levels of the organization. It's about the mindsets and the belief that every incident is avoidable, and then it's about taking ownership.
The red thread through all of it is actually the behavioral part of it. We don't need more procedures, we don't need more lists, but we need to act and be, as a leader, be passionate about what we are doing, and that passion should enlighten also our employees in changing behaviors towards actually wanting all of us to have a safe workplace.
Where leaders choose to dedicate a significant part of their time and really hold safety as a personal value, they can influence the organization they're in. But we're not yet at a point where the industry can consistently say that every subsequent leader will continue that journey, or that we have it consistently across our industry. And that's really what's going to be needed to get ultimately to our goal of zero harm.